Hello, my name is Lewis Frost and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Sarah's Tag. We're a direct-to-satellite livestock information platform and smart ear tag company focused on traceability, animal provenance and welfare. What we've developed is the world's first and only direct-to-satellite smart ear tag for livestock. There is no other device in the world that has the capability of that which we have produced. It's also on track to become the world's only accredited smart tag of any kind. The accreditation I'm referring to is that pertaining to animal identification and official animal identification programs, both internationally through bodies like ICAR and nationally through many of the mandatory schemes run in countries all around the world. We developed this platform in response to three main drivers. One being on-farm efficiencies. We know that our producers are going to have to feed a growing global population in the face of less available arable land and freshwater resources, and they're going to need technology to do that. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The problem doesn't just stop at the farm gate. As animals leave that farm and travel throughout the entire supply chain, those challenges travel with them. We have issues around traceability, around food security, food origin, food safety, and food fraud that need to be solved, which is why our device stays with the animal for its entire life. The final challenge is how we then deliver this product and communicate the story or provenance about where it's come from, how it was raised, and how it was treated to the modern consumer, who has never cared more but known less about where their food comes from. So how are we actually doing that with the tag? Well, the tag contains a number of different technologies, and I just want to point out a few of them to you today, and some of the use cases that we see being developed using the data coming from these sensor technologies. Starting at box number one, the tag does contain a GPS device, and whilst it's just nice to know where your animals are for general peace of mind, there are far more beneficial use cases that our early adopters are already realizing. One of them is mustering or mustering efficiency. In more of the large and extensive grazing management properties that we work with, even knowing where your animals are can save you tens of thousands of dollars in fuel, as they often operate aircraft, helicopters and light planes covering areas as large as in excess of 1 million acres, just trying to find where their stock are to bring them in and have a management interaction. Likewise, it can be very useful to understand where your animals are and how they're moving around and engaging with the pasture that you're trying to manage. Where do they spend most of their time? Where are they grazing? Where are they resting? How often do they access water? We're going to delve a little bit deeper on pasture management with a bit of a case study on one of our software partners a little bit later on. So I'll just leave it there for now. Another really exciting area we're being involved in is that of carbon farming. When people using the tags to automate the process of generating and capturing data to apply for carbon credits in various systems and schemes around the world. The information can, of course, be used at an organizational level as well. So for the first time, many people are developing asset registers for the livestock within their business and leveraging that against financiers and insurers to make sure they're getting the best deal for the products they're purchasing and to de-risk the asset class that is cattle. Moving on, of course, if you know where your animals are, you can probably infer whether or not they're meant to be there. So it could be something innocent, as is the case with this animal, just wandering out through a gate that's been left open, or it could be something more sinister, such as stock theft. And we receive a lot of inquiries regarding stock theft from markets and industries all around the world. Within Australia, it still costs the industry over $250 million a year. In other places around the world, in particular sub-Saharan Africa, it's a highly emotive topic and relates more to personal safety than just to stock theft alone. The tag also contains a detailed, quite an advanced accelerometer, providing detailed information on animal behaviour, traits, looking at the animal's activity and changes in that activity over periods of time, benchmarking it against the animal, and raising an alert when a negative welfare outcome or a distress event has been triggered on the tag. And again, I've got a bit of a case study around the accelerometer component, and in particular the algorithms that have been developed and are being developed continuously for this platform out there in the market. And that's some work that was done by CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, and the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries. And we're fortunate enough to be the beneficiary of a lot of that work when it comes down to the algorithms on our tags. A couple of other points to note about the tag: they have a very high retention quotient. They are tamper evident and tamper proof. So once the tag's been applied, there's no moving it around. It stays with that animal. Thanks to the unique battery chemistry and solar panel combination we've employed, there is no maintenance or change to the battery required for up to 10 years. So it lasts the life of the animal. The tag can incorporate an ISO-compliant low-frequency RFID transponder, and this has been crucial to making sure the tag is going to fit in with many of these identification schemes around the world. So we're trying to provide a level of backwards compatibility, not just coming in and trying to be disruptive for disruption's sake. We do monitor ambient temperature. It's not the animal's temperature. We are monitoring the environment. And the tag contains a Bluetooth module, the latest format of Bluetooth module, that allows us to reach out and communicate with the tag when new algorithms come available and deploy them onto the device itself. So it sounds like we're doing a lot with this tag and the data that's coming off it. I just want to take a moment to drill down on the data side and how these algorithms being developed and what kind of work is being done on the platform to make sure that there's longevity of application there. So this is just some raw data from a real cow wearing a sensor, eating grass, real grass. And you can see it's just raw accelerometer output. So essentially force, duration, intensity, and direction. And this is just 1 second of data. So we're collecting samples at 50 times per second. And then we need to go on and interpret that and understand it in a little more detail. We start to graph it out and start to have a look at the 3 main forces, up and down, intensity, duration, and direction, side to side, and forward and back. So that's just what those numbers are representing from that raw accelerometer output. And we see that when we observe the animal as various movement, motion, and locomotion of the animal's head. That's one of the tags there on this animal's ear. It does sit on the back of the ear. So if you were just observing motion, if you saw an animal's head moving backwards and annotated it as moving backwards and referred to the data, you would see that the forces recorded on the accelerometer were predominantly in the backward direction as well. But we're not just interested in animal movement, we're interested in a whole host of different behaviors, particularly some of the more advanced behaviors. And that's really where we want to spend our time, unlocking value for the end user, for the producer, not just telling them that an animal's head moves backwards. So how do we then turn those sensor signals into animal behavior? This is an example of some multimodal sensor data. It includes more than just an accelerometer. This is from some work that CSIRO did involving other types of sensors and sensor outputs. And what they do is they're trying to align that with various behaviors. So we can see there's a section of these graphs that's highlighted or bookended by some blue lines, and that was a grazing event. So they're essentially using machine learning and artificial intelligence methodology to find signals within that sensor data that they can correlate to observed behavior. One of the most challenging things here is not the sensor data, it's the observed behavior, because it's very difficult to get consistency in the way that humans visually classify certain behaviors. It requires us to train the people taking observations a lot, and you need many, many hours of observations to get good quality data. It can be also very difficult to get behaviors that are displayed for very short periods of time. So drinking is a great example where animals don't sit there and drink for 15 minutes straight. They may only drink for a short 10 seconds before they put their head up and look around and then return to drink a little bit more. For the training of these algorithms from this type of data, we need good blocks of time. Like you can see from this grazing behavior here, we need a good block of time of an animal exhibiting or performing one particular behavior. So it gives us good clean data and enables us to produce good solid algorithms. So we take that movement, that data, we've got this synchronized. We have to make sure all the different streams of data line up and are sort of aligned to a GPS clock. And then we need to classify them with these algorithms we've developed into various behaviors like walking, resting, ruminating, eating, drinking, even panting for heat stress. And then we want to correlate those with a target trait. This is often done through some sort of index or indicator trait. So a really good example would be a generic health index. So from 0 to 100, 100 being a perfectly healthy animal, 0 being dead or completely immobile, where does this animal land? And we have to monitor many different states of behaviors. We have to benchmark them against the individual at that time on that day, compared to what they were doing at 5 p.m. last Thursday, and also to what the rest of the herd is doing if we're going to try and actually really understand how this animal is doing. One of the things we were really interested in, given that we do so much work on extensive grazing properties and environments, was look at grazing and feed intake as a really particular behavior or trait that we wanted to hone in on. And it was interesting that the accuracy of the behavior classification across the board was very high, but particularly for grazing, the work that CSIRO had done there was scored incredibly high. So we wanted to drill down and start to understand what else could we learn from grazing, what else could we do with that information. And what CSIRO, in conjunction with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, discovered was that actual intake could be calculated from various behaviours. So I'm not going to go into all of the detail around this. There's a lot of research to cover. Please reach out to me if you'd like to know more, or if I can connect you with some of the scientists, the principal investigators actually conducted this work. But they did a lot of work on intake. How can we measure intake? How can we look at markers, fecal samples? How can we look at changes in biomass or disappearance? Feeding micro swards, so very controlled meals and meal sizes of grass and other fodder types to animals, to actually monitor how long it took them to eat it or how big an individual bite was. They spent a lot of time working in that space and a lot of time on some really specific behaviours. So rather than just categorising behaviour as grazing or not, starting to look particularly at the way the animal was feeding, how long they were feeding for, what was the frequency, were they staying in one place and having a very large meal, or were they moving around and taking small bites or selectively grazing a pasture? And they modelled a lot of that work over time to see what they could learn. They drilled down, as I mentioned, really on that type of grazing behaviour and mapped out the spatio-temporal components of that behaviour. So better understanding the physical process of the grazing behaviour, how the pasture is being consumed, then understanding the animal intake around that consumption and how changes in those two things impacted things like grazing bouts or grazing event size, how big was a meal, how much intake in a particular meal, and even mapping that across various pastures and paddocks. So I'm going to sort of bring it to a close just on that grazing part of the talk today, but we've reached a point where our work with CSIRO, we're now got the exclusive rights to actually take that algorithm and we're converting it. As I said earlier, some of the work they did was largely with collars. So we're now converting that algorithm from a sort of collar located accelerometer basis to the ear tag that we've deployed in CSIRO. And we'll be working that over the coming months and deploying it into next year. And as I said earlier, because the tags are upgradable, everyone who already has our tags deployed in the field will benefit from that release. They'll be able to upgrade their tags and have that additional data set sent through to them multiple times a day in near real time. So you can see we're generating large amounts of data, large amounts of raw data. We looked at some of that raw sensor data. We work with direct to satellite communication, so low Earth orbit satellite technology. One of the limitations is that you can't send a whole bunch of data all the time up through LEO satellites. You need to have it compressed or encoded in some way. So the way we solve this challenge, and to make sure we are still generating a lot of value with what was coming off the tag, is that we have set the tag up to act as an edge computing node. So it actually processes all the raw data on the edge, on the animal. And the only thing we're sending back is highly processed and encoded information that we then store securely in our cloud. How it processes that information is completely governed by that suite of algorithms I mentioned earlier. So it's those algorithms that control what we do with the raw data, but only the processed and encoded information gets back to the cloud. So we can't drill down on that data at a later date or do any sort of level of post-processing. We can post-process and analyze that information in the cloud, but the raw data, exactly how many minutes were spent ruminating, grazing, etc., we've had to crunch that on the tag. From there, in our cloud, we make the data available through a rugged yet pretty simple suite of APIs. On many occasions, we're pushing this out to various third parties, and this is on an as permissioned basis by the farmer. So this could be They send us a request to distribute information to their bank, to their insurance agency, to their veterinarian, to their farm consultant, to a carbon consulting provider, whoever it is. And we also provide data directly back to the producer, straight down to that end user. But we're not doing that into a software platform or app that we've developed. And the reason that we haven't developed an end user sort of user interface is that we see no market failure in that space. Producers have hundreds, if not thousands, of software solutions to choose from around the world. Many of these are highly nuanced. They're not written in different coding languages, but literally written in different languages for people in different parts of the world. And they're usually tailored to specific production systems. So maybe an intensive barn, TMR fed dairy, maybe an extensive grazing operation, maybe a feedlot. So we don't want to have to sort of reinvent the wheel and try and force an app on producers, which is yet another platform they have to manage and another place they have to conduct duplicate data entry. Instead, we're conducting integrations with all of these platforms, and we simply serve up their tag data directly in that platform, right there alongside their existing animal records, animal weights, animal treatments, movements, etc., so they can analyze it all in one place. And the second brief case study I want to take you through is a group we work with called SIBO Labs, who's doing just that. They're taking this information, and yes, the tag data is exciting in its own right, but we see so much more power and value being created when it's combined with other data sets. So SIBO Labs traditionally do satellite imagery and sort of NDVI pasture biomass estimates for producers. They operate in Australia and many other countries around the world, but they worked with us to integrate quite early on, and they are an approved software partner of ours. They integrated with us so they can visualize tag data, so they can look at individual animal tracking and current position. They're doing this in near real time with the data that's coming down from the satellite. And of course, you can map your farm out in their platform. You can completely map your farm, detailed paddocks, boundaries, laneways, whatever it is, and they can provide alerts to you based on distress alerts coming through the SeriesTag system or sort of geospatial alerts. So if an animal gets out of its paddock or into an area it's not meant to be, or appears to be stuck in this creek you can see marked out through the middle of the property, they could send you an alert based on its location in real time, and you could go out and interact with that animal and actually prevent a negative welfare outcome from occurring. What they can do over time then is start to look at heat maps and trends in animal movements and animal locations. So maybe it's at the mob level, what we would refer to as a mob or a small group of animals. How are they moving around a particular paddock or the entire property? Or it could simply be a large group of individuals, in this case, in one of the larger paddocks on the property, starting to develop a heat map for a user definable period. So you can see on the left, this is completely user definable, where those animals are going and how they're utilizing the available pasture. So I think you'll start to see why I find this exciting is that as we start to work out where the animals are going, imagine if we could overlay this with another layer of data, which is that feed intake algorithm work I mentioned earlier from CSIRO and New South Wales DPI, and start to understand how much they're consuming at that point in time and refer it back to the actual NDVI imagery. So SIBO Labs provides 5-day Sentinel 10-minute resolution satellite imagery, which comes down just within hours of capture. This is some of the raw data here, but processed, we can start to understand pasture biomass estimates, and both within paddock and between paddock variability and level summaries, we can look at them right on the map. So looking at this paddock down the bottom where the animals are, you can see there's not many animals left around the sort of heavily grazed or low biomass areas. Most of them are over on the left here, really feeding and grazing in the sort of small part of the paddock that has good coverage left in it. So this image would suggest it's time to move this mob. And this is another sort of visualization of the same set of data where we're looking at forage budgets by paddock. So obviously the dark green paddocks have more forage in them, moving to sort of yellow to white, and it would obviously move through the orange and red sort of color range as well as that paddock started to get really, really bad. But that's about all I wanted to show you on this. Again, just trying to explain how Yes, the data coming from the tag is fantastic. When we can layer it with other information these farmers have access to, we can add so much more value. We're really excited to be bringing the CSIRO, New South Wales DPI, grazing and feed intake algorithm over the top, and interested to see what our partners and software partners can do with that extra level of information. So what now? Well, we did just recently launch our e-commerce platform about 4 weeks ago. That's gone live globally and is functioning in, I think, in 58 countries around the world. Why is that exciting? I know e-commerce is something that's been done by many different industries before. It might surprise you to know that absolutely no smart tag company in the world, apart from Ceres Tag, is capable of operating this way. So traditionally, people have to come to your farm, get a map, work out where the antennas are going to go, install a hardware system that could cost tens of thousands of dollars before you receive a single tag. We're really fortunate that for us, anyone, anywhere, at any time can simply acquire our devices online. They'll be shipped directly to you in a contactless, COVID-safe environment. And because of the infrastructure-free nature of the work we do, you can simply deploy those tags on your animals and start working with one of many software partners like Cibo Labs. And we're really just out here to help producers make better decisions faster. Thank you.